Hi, my name's Kyle Rodman. I'm with the Northern Arizona University School of Forestry, and I'm going to be talking to you today about patterns of disturbance in mixed conifer forests of the Southwest. When Aldo Leopold gazed across the forests of Arizona and New Mexico during the early 1900s, it is unlikely he could have anticipated the changes that would occur over the next century. But these forests did change, substantially. This is especially true for ponderosa pine and mixed conifer ecosystems. Many of these forests have dramatically increased in density due to human activities. Mixed conifer forests cover approximately 2.5 million acres in the Southwest. Though this acreage may be small compared to the total acreage of southwestern forests, mixed conifer ecosystems are incredibly important. They have high biodiversity and provide important habitat to numerous plant and animal species. This forest type is under intense threat from future climate change, but one U.S. Forest Service report showed that the range of mixed conifer forests actually expanded between the 1960s and the 1980s. Expansion of mixed conifer forests could be largely attributed to an alteration in the disturbance regime and the invasion of shade-intolerant species into previously unsuitable habitat in lower elevation areas. The mixed conifer ecosystem exists between ponderosa pine forests and spruce fir forests on a gradient of moisture and elevation. This ecosystem itself is a transitional zone, having species that are present in ponderosa pine and spruce fir forests, and also having structural and functional characteristics of both adjacent forest types. In reality, there is a broad range of forested areas that might be considered mixed conifer, but for ease of discussion, many managers and researchers group mixed conifer forests into the subcategories of warm and dry or cool and wet. These types are usually separated by differences in species composition due to either slope aspect or elevation. High elevation areas and north-facing slopes are wetter and typically more dense. Lower elevation areas and south-facing slopes are drier and were historically more open due to the prevalence of frequent fire. Frequent disturbance generally is more typical of dry mixed conifer forests. These disturbances often open small amounts of growing space every few years. Cool and wet forests are dominated by moderate to high severity fire, as well as a different suite of pathogens and insects. Differences in density, stand structure, and species composition are the primary reasons for these differences. Many insects and pathogens are species-specific. Disturbances in the cool-wet type often create large amounts of growing space and establish new cohorts of trees. Fire is one of the most prominent types of disturbance in the mixed conifer ecosystem and is probably the most researched. Time intervals between fires are variable and highly site-dependent. Many studies suggest that historically, dry mixed conifer forests in the southwest experienced surface fire with patches of crown mortality. Contrarily, wet mixed conifer forests had fire only infrequently, but when it did occur, it killed many trees in large patches, often moving as active crown fire. In many parts of the western United States, fire has been absent from the landscape since Euro-American settlement. This shift is largely due to management policies beginning in the early 1900s that favored the protection of timber resources through suppressing all fires. Additionally, grazing by cattle, goats, and sheep reduced the continuity of grasses and other surface fuels, decreasing the likelihood of surface fire being carried in the understory. Fragmentation by roads probably also plays a role. These factors have caused a great deal of change in ecosystems that were dominated by frequent fire, but probably less structural change has occurred in forests with infrequent fire. Fires in ponderosa pine forests often occur in dry years after a period of wetter than average climate. In other words, the occurrence of fires is limited by fuel and climate. Fires in mixed conifer forests, on the other hand, are limited predominantly by climate. It could be logically extrapolated that the wetter a site is, the longer or more severe a drought period must be to allow for active fire. Stand dynamics will differ based on fire severity and extent. These characteristics of fire behavior are largely a result of microsite, context within the landscape, and climate. The occurrence of low-intensity surface fires favor thick-barked species like ponderosa pine, mature Douglas fir, or mature southwestern white pine. Low-intensity fire has the potential to maintain even-aged stands perpetually below densities present in the stem exclusion stage. Moderate-intensity fires create openings for new trees to regenerate and persist. All types of fire can lead to pulses in tree regeneration by opening growing space and reducing competition from herbs, grasses, and other plants in the understory. These changes can be thought of as creating conditions similar to the understory reinitiation stage. High-intensity fires are becoming increasingly common. They create large openings with few, if any, surviving trees on the landscape. Return to a forested ecosystem after high-intensity fire can take a substantial period of time due to the lack of seed sources and harsh microclimatic conditions. In this situation, stand development is reset to the stand initiation stage. Root diseases such as armillaria, anosum root rot, and tomentosis root rot are common in the Southwest. They are caused by various species of fungi that infect trees either through the soil or via wind-blown spores. Root disease contributes strongly to mortality, especially in older trees. One U.S. Forest Service report stated that 1/3 of all tree mortality on 6 different forests in the Southwest was due to root disease. Shade-tolerant species such as spruce, Douglas fir, and true fir are often more susceptible to these diseases than ponderosa pine. With the shifts in species composition that have occurred, root disease may be occurring more frequently than it did in the past. Armillaria and other root diseases typically kill trees in aggregated patches, forming expanding openings over long periods of time. These openings provide important heterogeneity to the landscape. Dwarf mistletoes are several different species of parasitic plants that attack conifers. Of the tree species present in southwestern mixed conifer forests, ponderosa pine and Douglas fir may be the most affected by dwarf mistletoe. Tree mortality, though somewhat uncommon, can occur in serious infections. Seeds of dwarf mistletoes are released from limbs of infected trees. Therefore, infection typically spreads in an aggregated fashion, and mortality often occurs in patches. Though mistletoe is a natural process, many current stands of trees may be more susceptible than they were in the past, and management may, at times, be needed. In heavily infested overstories, understories may also need to be removed to prevent further spread of the parasite. Dwarf mistletoe, though sometimes damaging to forest health, provides important habitat for many wildlife species by changing tree structure and creating densely vegetated witches' brooms. These can provide nesting areas and cover from predators for birds and small mammals. White pine blister rust, a non-native pathogen, primarily attacks southwestern white pine in our region. This disease is a stem rust that causes near total mortality of infected individuals and may lead to dramatic shifts in species composition across the landscape, reducing the abundance of southwestern white pine in the ecosystem. As one of the only mid-tolerant species in the southwestern mixed conifer forest type, the loss of this species could create an unfilled niche, potentially leading to increases of Douglas fir or white fir. Genetic resistance tests and outplantings of resistant trees may be important to prevent some of the effects of the pathogen and to maintain ecosystem diversity. Insects play an important role in southwestern forests. Some varieties, such as the Ips beetle, are triggered by drought and primarily attack weakened trees. Contrarily, mountain pine beetle and other species of Dendroctonus will often target vigorous trees and can kill them quickly, dramatically increasing the number of snags in an area. Fir engraver, spruce beetle, and many other species can have equally important impacts on forest structure and composition. Western spruce budworm, a defoliator, is the larval form of a moth. In its larval stage, the insect can cause nearly complete defoliation of trees in a relatively short time. Spike-top trees are evidence of past outbreaks. Western spruce budworm prefers to attack Douglas fir, true firs, and spruce species, but can also feed on pines if necessary. Pandora moth, another defoliator, is similar to western spruce budworm, but this species primarily feeds on ponderosa pine. Insect outbreaks may be isolated or widespread, affecting only one species or every species in the forest. They may be triggered by climate, site conditions, and any number of other factors. The usefulness of these patterns to silviculturalists depends on the site history and one's management objectives. Proper silviculture attempts to achieve goals by mimicking natural disturbances. The patterns of these disturbances, both spatially and temporally, must be understood in an effort to improve best management practices. In doing this, we will more closely recreate the processes to which these forests are adapted. Small gaps, created with individual tree selection treatments, can be used to mimic isolated insect mortality, blowdown of large trees, or low-intensity fire. Low thins, a common method of reducing fire hazard in forests, can be another effective way of imitating low-intensity fire. Large gaps, simulated by group selection treatments, have similar effects to moderate-intensity fire, dwarf mistletoe infection, or root rot. The size and shape of natural disturbance events and silvicultural treatments has a tremendous influence on the future appearance of a forest. Though the future may be uncertain, we can use our ecological knowledge to adaptively manage forests in this region. By doing this, we may be able to maintain many of the ecosystem services that we rely on so heavily. Aldo Leopold would agree with this idea, so long as our quest for ecosystem services does not destroy the naturalness of the ecosystems that we hold so dear. Thank you all for joining me today. Now get outside and enjoy our forests.